Okay, so hello, welcome everyone. Before we get started, we want to make sure you know that we are offering live interpretation in Spanish today.
Yes,
Great. So I'm going to ask our interpreter, Daniel Lotus, to invite you to his audio channel.
Sí, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Daniel. Hoy trabajo como intérprete para ustedes. Si ustedes están en una computadora, van a encontrar abajo en la barra de herramientas este círculo que dice interpretación, como un globo terráqueo. Y si oprimen ahí, van a ver una relación de idiomas y eligen el español. Si están en un dispositivo como un celular quizás tengan que apretar el botoncito More para que vean la interpretación. Hasta pronto.
Thank you, Daniel. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional.
También,
Okay. We're good, Daniel? All right, next slide, please. Well, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the indigenous peoples of the Muwekma, Ohlone, Ramaytush, and Tamian Nation, on which we are learning, working, and organizing today. We are committed to honoring and making visible the indigenous people and tribes that were intentionally displaced from their land, who remain here in Silicon Valley and are a part of our community. So welcome to Deep Dive on Affordable Housing, a how-to guide for advocates. This year's theme for Affordable Housing Month is Reimagining Home. So this course really looks to deepen our collective knowledge base. And this is the first event in our new quarterly Deep Dive on Affordable Housing series, which is designed to empower housing advocates and help you level up your impact. Please ask lots of questions. This really is an intention to sort of stretch our imaginations and rethink what it means to achieve a home for everyone in Silicon Valley. So near the end of today's event, we'll be asking you for your thoughts about some potential future topics you'd like us to cover. So be sure to stick around to the end. So I have the pleasure of introducing Rob Reinhardt with Bank of America, one of our sponsors. We're so thrilled to have Bank of America here with us in this space and have Rob here with us. He's the Senior Relationship Manager in Community Development Banking at Bank of America in Northern California. Thank you, Rob, for being here, and thank you again for your sponsorship. So I'll allow you to say a few words about your work here and your partnership with us.
Well, thank you so much, Regina, and good afternoon, everyone. Bank of America values its partnership with Silicon Valley at Home and is a proud sponsor of this event. At Bank of America, we are focused on driving responsible growth and helping communities we serve to address the fundamental issues they are facing. One way we do this is through our commitment to providing financing to affordable housing and supporting organizations that advocate for affordable housing. Last year, we invested $6.6 billion to help create affordable housing units and provide economic opportunity across the country. So these funds will create over 11,600 affordable housing units and will include homes for families, seniors, veterans, formerly homeless, and those with special needs. And Bank of America continues to grow its support for affordable housing because we believe it's the right thing to do. We believe quality housing helps people gain dignity and strengthens communities to ensure they will be resilient and poised for growth. And I think many of us know the industry is very complicated. It's full of intelligent people that are hardworking to make a real difference in people's lives. And, I want to I want to add that the challenge of affordable housing has never been greater, with continuing rising construction costs, rising interest rates, NIMBYism, and legislative hurdles, and just trying to get the housing built or even rehabilitated and for quality housing. So with that, I want to end by saying Bank of America continues to support overcoming these challenges. And thank you again, Regina, and your team for your partnership and for continuing to tackle these issues that surround affordable housing.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you for you and Bank of America's commitment to this effort to reimagine home this year. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with this deep dive, and I'm going to turn it over to Allison.
Thank you so much, Regina. So welcome to the first event in our new deep dive on affordable housing series. So our goal in this series is to empower housing advocates like you with the knowledge to engage in local processes and to more effectively counter narratives of exclusion that we're hearing so much of lately. We'll be scheduling sessions in this series about every other month, and we'll go deeper into some of the topics that are central to affordable housing policy. We'll enhance our shared knowledge and effective advocacy. So our event today will fall into 4 sections. So first, we're going to set the stage for you and talk about the ways that government policies have contributed to the housing shortage and who is most impacted by that. Then we'll look at the diversity of affordable housing needs and the financial tools we have available to make it happen. Next, we'll look at the process and timeline for affordable housing development and identify the inflection points where you can engage most effectively. Finally, we'll have some time for Q&A. So as we go through the presentation, we'll be covering a lot of material. Please be sure to drop your questions in the chat during the presentation, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. So the term redlining comes from the federal government homeownership programs created as part of the 1930s era New Deal, which offered government-insured mortgages for homeowners, a form of federal aid designed to prevent a wave of foreclosures in the wake of the Depression and expand homeownership. The Federal Housing Administration used color-coded maps, ranking the loan worthiness of neighborhoods in more than 200 cities across the US, in large part on the basis of race. Neighborhoods with any Black residents were considered too risky for loans and were marked in red and excluded from homeownership and lending programs. So as a result, Black residents could not get home loans, even as the suburban landscape rapidly expanded. Policies like redlining, racial steering, and racial covenants, which barred homes from being sold to Black purchasers, were later outlawed, but they still persist in practice, with lenders often charging higher interest rates or refusing home loans to Black buyers, or appraising their homes at values far below comparable homes owned by white homeowners. Taken together, these government policies and practices permitted by the government help drive a huge wealth gap between white and Black families, with white families having an average of more than $188,000 in wealth compared to just over $24,000 for Black families. That makes it harder for Black families to purchase homes in single-family zone neighborhoods. So what is single-family zoning? Single-family zoning makes it illegal for a community to build anything other than a single home on a single lot. That means no apartment buildings, no condos, no duplexes. Berkeley was the first city in the nation to adopt single-family zoning in 1916 with the express stated purpose of preventing Black and brown people from being able to move into some parts of the city. On the face, the policy now is race neutral, but renting an apartment or duplex is less expensive than renting or buying a single-family home. As we've talked about, we already know government policies have deliberately undermined Black wealth. Today, Bay Area cities with high levels of single-family zoning have home values that are $100,000 higher, incomes that are $34,000 higher, and are nearly 20% whiter than the rest of the Bay Area cities. Single-family zoning is a government policy that has helped create a shortage of housing, both inside single-family zones where limited land is at a premium and outside single-family zones where all the rest of us are crammed, and that has made home prices skyrocket. Meanwhile, those lucky enough to afford a home or buy in before housing prices began their exponential rise have incentives to keep things the same, and local control gives a small group of existing residents veto power over what can be built. The policies made to keep people out have worked exactly as they were intended to. And as a result, many current Bay Area residents are being displaced from their homes by rising costs, no matter how hard they work. The key message here, the real takeaway from this section, is that not only are the roots of the housing crisis planted firmly in racial discrimination and segregation, but that these same policies and ideas have played a key role in our housing shortage and continue to hurt all of us today. The negative consequences of not prioritizing housing impact all of us, not just the people struggling to find affordable housing. Safe, stable homes are the foundation for strong communities. Good schools, good jobs, safe neighborhoods, those all depend on housing. And for the thousands of small businesses struggling to stay afloat, to attract customers and skilled employees, making housing more affordable is critical. Housing costs don't just affect where any single person or family is able to live, they impact the economy and resiliency of our whole region. Because of the policies that are constraining housing production, the amount of housing available in our metropolitan area has remained shockingly stagnant over time as the number of jobs has consistently increased. Since 2010, we've added on average 1 unit of housing for every 7 new jobs. This supply and demand imbalance between jobs and housing has pushed rents up 75% over that time period. And as the median home price is up nearly 300%. The jobs housing imbalance pushes relatively higher income people into competition with relatively lower income people for those scarce, more affordable homes. We simply don't have enough housing for the jobs. Here we're taking a look at who can afford the average rent in Santa Clara County based on the average wage for key jobs. It's clear that the essential workers our economy relies on can't afford to live here. As they're pushed out by the high cost of housing, we face worker shortages in our favorite restaurants and stores, the child care centers that care for our children so we can go to work, and even our doctor's offices. Workers forced to commute from outlying areas every day have to pay steep prices for gas, right? And add tons of greenhouse gas emissions to the air just to try to earn a living. In many cases, families with low incomes are living with multiple households crowded in one home or apartment just to try to keep a roof over their heads. The market is not building homes these neighbors can afford. And that's where subsidized affordable housing for people with lower incomes becomes so critical. So what are we talking about when we say low income or extremely low income? Income level categories are determined by both the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, and the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. They're adjusted to account for the median income in different areas of the country. Santa Clara County has one of the highest area median incomes in the country and state at $151,300 for a family of 4 as of 2021. It's important to note too that there are a lot of people with zero income or income that's significantly below 30%. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the tools that are available to produce housing for those folks. The project-based Section 8 contracts are really needed in order to provide stable housing at that income level. So who are the people in extremely low income renter households? In California, almost 40% are working in the labor force. Another 30% are senior adults, and 13% have physical or developmental disabilities. That makes a total of 83% of our extremely low income renter households who are people on fixed incomes or working in low wage jobs. In Santa Clara County, we have more than 51,000 families with very low or extremely low incomes who rent and don't have access to an affordable home because we don't have enough affordable homes to go around. 74% of families with extremely low incomes in Santa Clara County are paying more than half of their income for housing costs. So these severely cost-burdened households are more likely than other renters to sacrifice necessities like healthy food and healthcare just to be able to pay the rent, and to experience unstable housing situations like evictions and homelessness. These are our working community members, and they can't afford to live here. The number of our Santa Clara County neighbors experiencing homelessness has risen consistently since 2015. We just got the numbers from the 2022 homelessness census yesterday, And while the extensive interventions with eviction moratoria and rental assistance have absolutely protected far more people than would have been helped otherwise, we have seen the number of residents experiencing homelessness rise again in Santa Clara County. These are folks who have been our neighbors all along. 81% lived right here in Santa Clara County before they became homeless. 89% were more than willing to move into permanent affordable housing if it became available. Why are so many of our neighbors unhoused? The biennial homelessness census conducted in 2019 found that most people who are homeless couldn't afford rent. So I'm going to pass this on to Regina to talk a little bit more about how we can meet the needs of these neighbors that we're learning about with low incomes.
Thank you, Allison. So I think, as you can see from the information shared by Allison, the solution to guaranteeing that more of our neighbors can live safely in housing that they can afford, the solution is more housing. And so we're hoping to, as we sort of dive deeper into how affordable housing is developed, that we can sort of better understand the challenges of building more housing in today's market. There's a fundamental economic challenge at building housing at cost dictated by the market. So developers who build affordable housing are in direct competition with market rate developers for land, the cost of construction, and they're limited in the revenue that they can generate because of the fact that they're on one side trying to limit the rents that they're renting out the units for so that they are more affordable, but also they may have higher operating costs because of greater needs of the population being served. So there is sort of an economics that is at play here when we're talking about building more housing and building it for those who need it the most and are most vulnerable to displacement. Virtually all housing is developed, and in this case, we're talking about rental housing in particular, but virtually all housing is developed, owned, and operated by private entities. So this is, when we talk about housing as a right, we're talking about housing really as a public good, something that everyone should have access to. However, we're relying on private entities who are working under market forces, market conditions to produce this public good. And it really is the role of the government to support, incentivize more of this public good being produced to meet the needs of the general public. But every developer has to make sure that the economics, the financials, the sort of operating and costs versus sources available works so that they can produce the housing. And there really are very thin margins when we talk about producing affordable housing, especially when we have quite a few nonprofit organizations producing affordable housing and trying to operate, make sure that they have the capacity to build out the teams to execute, all while producing this public good. So we're going to go a little deeper into how we, as a public entities, support through subsidies and things like that, making sure that there's enough funding available and incentives available to build the housing and ensure that it's affordable to the folks who are going to live there. So what is affordable housing? One way that I sort of like to think about it is, in order for housing to be affordable and for the folks who are living there to not be paying more than 30% of their rent, we either have to lower the cost of the housing or increase the renter's ability to pay. So on one side, you have housing that is affordable, meaning the rents are restricted. That means that there may be deed restrictions and a requirement to rent those units, those homes to folks who qualify by their income, and you're limited in how much rent you can charge below the market. Also, deed restricted properties tended to have restrictions in terms of how much rent they can charge from anywhere from 55 to 99 years, which can be extended if there's additional funds added to the development for maintenance. And then again, income levels are monitored to make sure that only eligible households are benefiting from that. On the other hand, in order to enhance a family's or an individual's ability to pay, there's also rent subsidies, which can either be attached to the units, which would be considered an affordable development, which has rent subsidies attached to those units, so that means if the tenant moves, the subsidy doesn't go with them, it stays with the unit. And if someone new moves into that unit, they are able to take advantage of that subsidy. We also talk about strategies to build homes that are more affordable in their sort of costs. So the ability to build housing that maybe the units are a little bit smaller, so the cost per unit is not so high to operate or develop. Maybe older apartments that have been around longer, so to be able to operate them, it's a little bit less cost, and then they're more affordable to folks at lower income ranges. And then there's also the ability to have tenant-based vouchers or rental subsidies that do travel with the family or the individual as they go into the public market to try to find housing, and then it's made affordable to them with that rent subsidy. So there is a range of what we look at as affordable housing, but primarily we're going to be focusing in this course today on those developments that are deed restricted and built from new construction or preserved as affordable because they have those deed restrictions on them. And there's an intentionality to serving a specific income level and also keeping the rents low enough so that we know the folks who live there can afford them. So that there's also a continuum within that sort of definition of affordable housing. So there's a range all the way from, interim housing that is time limited. Folks can stay there for 90 days or 6 months, but it's time limited how long you can stay there. And that may be for folks who are currently unhoused to give them an opportunity to not live in conditions and encampments or in their car, but also actually have shelter that is safe, knowing that this is sort of a bridge to more permanent housing. There's also permanent housing solutions for seniors where it's restricted for use by folks who might be 62 years and older or 55 years and older. There's mixed income, which may allow for folks who are at different ranges of those area median income levels to all live in a community together. That tends to be, targeted at different income ranges, but all the way up to 60% of area median income, but it could also go up to 80% of area median income or 120, depending on the goal. There's also inclusionary housing, which is very intentional about building housing mixed into new developments that will have a substantial amount of market rate housing available. And then there's permanent supportive housing. That may be housing where we're providing services with an intent of helping people stay housed because they may have some sort of disabling condition or or something else that has really impacted their ability to stay stably housed. So if they have access to those resources, they're more likely to stay housed. And so as you can see, there's just a real variety of what it means to build affordable housing, because they're, you know, as humans, we all have different needs, different conditions, and housing really is, more housing really is the solution to help people stay housed. So there has to be variety in what's being produced. So this is an attempt to sort of give you a glimpse of what we mean by sources that we need to dedicate to building affordable housing in a way where the rents are restricted, but the costs are comparable to market costs and market rate development costs. So if we have, you know, costs in land and building that that is comparable to market rate, and market rate developers are charging, you know, rents that are unaffordable in order to make the numbers justify building each community that they build, then we need subsidies to be able to build affordable housing and restrict the rents and not put the burden on the actual tenants and residents in terms of creating a building that is financially sustainable. So the government typically focuses on a few types of sources. The main source is the low-income housing tax credit. It is the primary source of funding in affordable housing. And as you can see here, there are two types of low-income housing tax credits. There's the 9%, which is extremely competitive. There's an allotment that comes from the state, which is based on per capita for each state, and extremely competitive to get, and typically focused on special needs. And it provides more equity because these tax credits are sold to investors that provide equity to build the housing. And so in this first capital stack, the example shows a project that was successful in receiving 9% low-income housing tax credits. So it only needs 25% of local funds, and it can support a 15% of the total funds needed in a bank loan. The 4%, the middle scenario is showing that 4% tax credits provide significantly less equity. They're less competitive, but still competitive to secure. And you're going to see about the same amount of bank loan, but need more gap financing, more sources from either the local sources or from state programs that support affordable housing. And so here, we've almost doubled the amount that we need in a mix of local and state sources. All the way to the right in the third scenario is an example of an affordable development that's really looking to lower the rent to serve a deeper area median income, maybe extremely low income, which is at 30% of area median income, really trying to serve a deeper need and the most vulnerable residents, but that reduces the amount of bank loan, maybe slightly higher operating costs. And so there we need even more state and local subsidies. And so this is really significant because in every scenario, we need local subsidies. And that is why we have sources such as Measure A for Santa Clara County and how critical they are to moving projects forward. That is why when projects secure state sources, it's a huge win because that also supports being able to provide more housing and at a deeper income level. So this is why we really need local sources, because there is a need to support these projects. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that really talks about, where do these local sources come from? They can be a mix of anything. There's sources that are federal funds that come from HUD or other federal sources that may come to the local jurisdiction directly. There's also commercial linkage fees that we've talked about, the importance of having fees that are collected when developers of commercial buildings develop, so that we can fund more affordable housing by collecting those fees as our commercial buildings start to move into development in the area. There's the ability for some private developers to do land dedication as a part of inclusionary zoning. There's publicly owned land that can be dedicated to building more affordable housing to cut down on the cost of securing land. Sometimes the city's general fund might be used to build more affordable housing. There are in lieu fees that can be paid by developers so that they reduce their commitment to build inclusionary housing or eliminate it altogether by paying in lieu fees. There's the ability to use transfer taxes and leverage those to pass bonds and raise funds that way. And then there's repayments of previous loans that can go into those local buckets. So there's lots of different ways that a city or a county may fund these local buckets that can go into funding more affordable housing. And we are going to get into a little bit more of the development process next. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Matthew to talk about that.
Great. Thank you so much, Regina. Okay. So key takeaways are that there's lots of different types of housing that we build to respond to the needs, that there's only a piece that comes from local sources, that there's a lot of outside factors that go into whether or not a project can go forward. So I'm going to go quickly through the process and try and highlight the key places in which we see what's happening and we can engage, but also explain a little bit about all the stuff that we don't see. So the first thing I want to make it clear is that all of this happens within an environment that we have created collectively. And there are preconditions to affordable development. There's resource availability, there's land availability, but there's also public will and political courage. And without those four, it's not going to happen. And those are largely defined at the local level. Next slide. So one of the things that is often confusing is there is a difference between planning and developing. And oftentimes the first time we see opportunities to engage are around policy issues or planning processes. The reality is that when we do large plans and we get a commitment of 20% or 25% affordable in the plan area, or when we do a housing element and we identify all these sites for affordable housing, we're not developing, we're just planning. We're laying the foundation. Sometimes we talk about these as tools. Sometimes it's valuable to think about it as preparing the soil so that it's ready for us to move forward. We do this through policy, inclusionary frequently. Sometimes we get commitments from larger developers in plan areas, but what we don't, or what we need to realize is that the commitment to include the housing doesn't mean that they're going to pay for it. And oftentimes they're paying a piece, but even in those large plan areas, when we get a commitment, it requires additional local and other public money. Next slide. So really quickly, we've broken it down into 5 pieces. There's the preliminary project development stage. There's an entitlement process, which is when the project is approved at city council, we see that. Then there's a period in which basically after the entitlement project process, everything goes dark. There's a financing period, there's a construction period, there's a lease up period, and then of course there's ongoing management of the property. Next slide. So there's a lot of material here. Let me go through it really quickly. Before we see anything, a nonprofit developer is going through an elaborate process. Often this is not funded. There are no immediate resources for this process. It gets recouped at the end, or it comes out of the resources that the nonprofit developer has going into the project. But first part of the process is locating an appropriate site. Remember, if we're talking about preparing the soil, having sites available is really critical for this first stage in the process, even if we don't see it happening. Needs to be good location. It has to fit the funding opportunities and the constraints that are happening both locally and at the state level. Usually there's a process of checking in with planning and housing staff about the potential of a certain location. Sometimes they get a yes or a no. Hopefully the staff is responsive. Then there's a process of securing the land, making sure that they have some control over it, usually through an option to purchase contract, sometimes buying it outright. And then they have to develop the project design. They have to figure out what financially they need in order to make the project go. They have to incorporate the different streamlining or density bonus that allows them to build more or build more quickly. And all of that goes into shaping who's going to be served by this project. So when we talk about penciling, we're really talking about the different pieces and assumptions that go into putting together a project design before it even gets introduced to early community engagement. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding of how much work has already happened. And so there's frustration about how hard it is to change, even when there's a meaningful effort to engage with community interests. Next slide. So initial community discussion, there's a project, there's a file, an application that is filed with the city. The application is reviewed, figure out if the city needs to do additional work. This can take some time. Oftentimes then there are multiple public reviews through committees and commissions. And this is often the first time where we see this project in public. And all of the rest of what's happened before has really been built again on this foundation, the soil that we've prepared, so the tools are in place, political will and confidence that the project can move forward is in place. And then finally, we see it at council and it's sort of approved or not. And unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. Next slide. Then the development kicks into making the project real. Have to purchase the land, line up the financing, which can take multiple applications at different city levels, county levels. Sometimes those timelines line up, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you don't get funded the first time. People often say, oh, this project is entitled. How come it hasn't moved in 3 or 4 years? Well, it's a very complicated process and you no longer see it in public. The building permits have to be prepared, the plans, it goes through a check. Finally, the permits are issued. Next slide. And then they break ground and they build a beautiful project, and then it gets leased up. It gets approved by the city, it gets leased up, and then there are ongoing operating expenses and processes that happen. The point of this discussion for me is really to acknowledge a couple of things. One is that all of the pre-work that we do in creating the policy tools, creating a general expectation and public will that these projects are going to go forward, engaging with the large plan processes to make sure that the land is available and there's a clear expectation of where that affordable housing is going to go. Those are critical because a lot of this process we don't see. And honestly, when we see them, there's a tremendous amount that has already happened. And part of our job is to make sure that's happening in a conducive environment. But part of our job is also acknowledging that there's a lot of work that happens before these things become public. And so there are challenges of figuring out how to be responsive and at the same time work within the constraints and the environment that the development has been planned under. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about the timeline and acknowledge that this varies tremendously. There's some projects that are simple. There's a master plan that has already determined allowable uses. Sometimes there's a environmental analysis that's already in place, and so it doesn't have to be redone for each project. Sometimes the city staff is just tremendous and does a great job of coordinating and working with folks and streamlining the process. There has been significant changes lately in state law that provide some guidelines on how projects need to be processed at a local level, but it's still a challenge. And so the timeline, if you look, the initial preparation, entitlement process preparation, sometimes it takes a long time to find a site, figure out how it might work. I think the other thing to realize is that the entitlement process is an ongoing back and forth. Some of you are in smaller cities or larger cities, and you know that there can be a study session and then a review and another series of community meetings, another study session before the project actually comes back to be approved by a city council. And then the construction process can really vary. Sometimes it's identifying a workforce that's ready to go. But the key to this preparation post-entitlement process is really the timeline around the funding. The difference between an affordable project and a market rate project in terms of the timeline and the cost is very often the process of securing the money. You need to get the big piece, the tax credits, and then you have to make sure you have enough of the other pieces to fill those gaps that were identified in the earlier discussion. Construction can be slower, faster. It's a little more consistent, but again, this can take a long time. And so locally, it's important that we as advocates and supporters are able to sort of articulate what some of the challenges are, the challenges of meeting different expectations because you're using public money, because there's a commitment to public engagement and outreach, even in cases in which it's not required because of new streamlining laws. Every affordable developer is making an effort to reach out to the local community and be as transparent as possible. So our job is, again, to make sure that we're preparing the soil, that we understand how all of those tools and pieces fit together to create a space in which that first process of identifying sites and figuring out what's likely to be able to come together and who the target population can or cannot be, depending on how stable the funding sources are and how big they are, what the local commitment's going to be, whether or not there's political will for certain projects. That's the pre-work that we all need to do that is invisible in the actual development process. And when stuff comes public, we need to be there to be able to explain how and why it is the way it is, and support projects so that they don't get bogged down in process. I am going to stop there. We've moved very quickly. I think we're planning on, depending on how y'all respond to the survey at the end, of coming back and walking through some of these pieces in greater detail, but we wanted really to contextualize some of the stuff that isn't traditionally in an overview of how affordable projects work, because we only see pieces and they're all really important. So that is the end for me. Why don't we, Allison, open it up for questions?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matthew and Regina. So we do have some questions in the chat. So the first question we have is, affordable housing seems like a Band-Aid on a rapidly expanding wound. Has there been any effort to address the influx of outside workers? Commercial linkage fees might kind of be key to some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I can start by saying that communities want economic growth, in the sense that you want vitality, you want the ability for folks to have access to jobs, to growing economic opportunity. And so there is a recognition that, yes, we do want our economy to thrive and to innovation. But what does that mean for making sure that the folks who already live here have access to that economic opportunity? And so I hear the question as being, okay, how do we help companies see the value of investing in local community members who already live here, don't have to relocate from other parts of the country, and seeing the value in investing, whether it's an education opportunity, resources, and all of that into the local community. And that's not such a central piece of a housing development as it is, the overall community development and economic development space. But there is a recognition through community benefits and things like that, more community-based work, that we do need to invest more in the local sort of capacity and make sure that there are access to those jobs locally.
Thank you, Regina.
This isn't going to solve all of the problems, but it's a pretty essential piece of the puzzle. If we don't figure out how to provide affordable opportunities for folks, even who are here, our communities are suffering. So, Christopher, I get it. We're just a part of the process, but we happen to think it's a really critical part of the process, and always looking for opportunities to coordinate on the broader picture.
Thank you. That's awesome. We have a question about in lieu fees. It seems like allowing developers to pay in lieu fees rather than build inclusionary units in their market rate developments can kind of slow down the process. Why is that an option for developers?
I can speak to that if you want, Regina. So in lieu fees are a double-edged sword, and there's like 4 edges to the double. So on the one hand, you really want to prioritize inclusionary units being built on site for the very reason that you talked about. It's more efficient, more timely. We all have I think we get it. It's great to integrate affordable and market rate units in one space. Those are the upsides. There are many cities that have essentially said that's what we're going to do. And they've made it very, very difficult not to do that. It is more expensive. Some cities will require inclusionary, but they'll only be affordable to households that make $140,000 a year. So it's not really doing a great job of addressing the depth of the affordability needs that we have. So what in lieu fees allow you to do is to build an 100% affordable project that allows you to reach deeper levels of affordability by leveraging additional public funds. And so in cities that don't have a commercial linkage fee that's providing resources for affordable development, in counties that don't have a Measure E, Measure A resource at the county level, those inclusionary fees sometimes are the only source of local money that can go into these projects. We're lucky that we've made commitments, not lucky, it's been a lot of work, but we have extended commitments in many parts of Santa Clara County to develop other sources, but that's really the balance, that the in lieu fees often allow us to leverage a deeper level of affordability by bringing in additional public resources.
Thank you. Matthew, you had talked a little bit about state level streamlining. Can you talk a little bit about streamlining at the local level and the impact that that can have on the finances of an affordable development?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we're in the housing element period. And the good news is there are a lot of cities that are talking about creating local by right ordinances that allow affordable projects to move ahead without discretionary review, which means trimming the process down and streamlining it so that the decision to support or not a project is happening internally based on objective guidelines and standards that the city has already adopted. That would be great. I haven't seen any of the cities say this is exactly what we're going to do, but I've seen it in the discussions, and it can make a big difference. It's important to recognize that you can do a lot to make the process work more effectively. That doesn't require a major policy fight. Sometimes it's just making sure that the staff is available and that the departments have the resources to do a good job of moving projects efficiently. And Regina, it looked like you had something to say you have more experience with wrestling with city government on this stuff.
No, I don't have anything to add. I do think that, streamlining has been tremendously important, seeing that we can get support from the state level to really help local municipalities get out of the way of building more housing. And I think we can take it further. We can work to be more creative and recognizing that, as Allison mentioned earlier on, these regulations were really meant to exclude. How can we take it further and make sure that communities are no longer utilizing those regulations for that purpose and really on board for building more housing? And I agree with the tie-in to the housing element in that work. It really is essential for us to understand a little bit more about how this works so that we can change it.
Thank you so much. And Matthew, do you want to reveal one of the best kept secrets in the affordable housing finance world about where LIHTC actually comes from?
This is important to me because I don't think we all get it, right? When we think about, the federal government and housing, we think, there's a Department of Housing and Urban Development. And guess what? They have very little to do with this process at this point. The tax credit program is run through the Internal Revenue Service. The IRS runs the tax credit program. So the primary affordable housing development tool that we have does not come through HUD and does not come through the budget. There is a fun fact that the IRS also runs the largest housing subsidy program in the country, which is the home mortgage interest deduction, which goes to homeowners, and you get a greater deduction depending on how big and how expensive your house is. So the value that we add to affordable housing development through the IRS, and we also add tremendous value to some of the wealthiest folks in the country through those deductions. All those programs are run by the IRS and not by the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you so much. It's kind of a dirty little secret in some ways, it feels like. We have time. Let's see if I don't see any other questions in the chat right now. I do see a question about whether or not slides will be available. Just to let everyone know, we will send out a recording of the event to everyone who registered, and also we'll send the slides out along with that. So, so thank you so much, Regina and Matthew, for sharing your knowledge today. I just want to thank our sponsors. So along with Bank of America, who's underwritten today's program, we've had lots of other sponsors that have been a part of Affordable Housing Month. We're in our third week, but there's still lots more. We couldn't do it without our sponsors. So thank you so much to Rob and Bank of America, as well as to our other sponsors. Together, your support is enabling us, along with many of our community partners, to share more than 50 events with the community to help kind of bring us together and celebrate our wins and to learn more, to be able to produce more of those wins that we very, very much need. So SD at Home is a membership organization. So at SD at Home, we believe that everyone deserves a safe, stable home. And if you do too, we invite you to join us as a member. When you join SV at Home, we can leverage our resources and work together, magnify our voices, and advance our strategic collaborative solutions to the housing crisis here in Santa Clara County and across the region. So your membership helps support our work, including educational events like this one. And you can find the link to join us. Could I get somebody to drop that? Oh, actually, you know what? I do. It's always a little funny when you're sharing screen too, but there's the link. If you would like to join us today, please click on that link and feel free to join us. We do also have a quick 4-question poll. We'd like your feedback about how the event went today, but in addition to that, we also really want your feedback on some of the topics that you would like to see covered in future deep dive events. So you can click more than one of those. If you're interested in all of them, feel free. Please just take a few minutes to give us your feedback on how the event went today and what you would like to see in the future.